I'm Ben Grapevine, and this is The Grapevine. Hawaii, the Aloha State. 8 islands in the middle of the wide expanse of the North Pacific. First discovered by Polynesian settlers arriving at least 750 years ago, the islands played host to hundreds of years of rich native Hawaiian history before their discovery by European explorers. Since Western arrival, the location of the Hawaiian Islands has made them strategically valuable for trade and military operations in the North Pacific. In the century following the American annexation of Hawaii in 1898, the United States has emphasized the military importance of Hawaii, with the U.S. Navy referring to the joint base at Pearl Harbor Hickam as the U.S. Navy's largest and most strategic island base in the Pacific. Today, the islands bear host to a number of American military fortifications. But to me, the most interesting fort on the island is one you might miss if you didn't know it was there. The fort, Fort Elizabeth, is the site of a German doctor's failed attempt to conquer the Kingdom of Hawaii for the Russian Empire. The story starts in 1815 aboard the Bering, a Russian merchant ship. The Bering wasn't the first Russian trade vessel to land in the Hawaiian Islands, but it came close to being one of the last. The ship, loaded with trade goods valued at 100,000 Russian rubles, or about $2.75 million today, as long as you trust my haphazard calculation, ran aground unexpectedly on the island of Kauai, where the local chief Kaumuali'i ordered its cargo seized. Intent on restoring their lost goods, the Russian-American company contracted the German doctor Georg Anton Schaefer and sent him as an agent to Kauai with the objective of retrieving the Bering's stolen cargo and securing repayment for anything lost. Why the Russian-American company chose a German surgeon as their chief diplomat to Hawaii is something halfway lost to history. But historian Walter Borneman suggests Schaefer's appointment wasn't the result of his political or diplomatic acumen, but instead that he was, quote, the only European available for the job. Schaefer had previously earned the respect of Russia's political elite for aiding in the nation's defense in the Napoleonic Wars. The doctor offered real support to the empire in its time of need, but he also suggested that the Tsar's government should devote resources toward constructing a large helium balloon to throw time bombs off of. With 1 ship and 0 balloons at his command, Schaefer set off for Russian Alaska. Landing initially on the island of Hawaii, which you may or may not know as the Big Island, Schaefer was instructed to meet and befriend the Hawaiian king Kamehameha, who had recently taken control of Kauai, formally uniting the Hawaiian Islands. Having successfully met and engaged with the king, Schaefer worked to develop a relationship, but saw early opposition from Kamehameha's advisors, many of whom wanted Schaefer sent away. At least one suggested the king should have him killed, just in case. Despite initial difficulty, Schaefer made some headway by offering medical treatment to the king and his family, leading Kamehameha to agree to the establishment of a Russian factory on the island of Oahu. Schaefer and his men built and administered the factory, traveling to Oahu to run it, but work conditions quickly deteriorated and supplies ran dry. Meanwhile, the Russian-American company was no closer to regaining control of its lost cargo, with Kamehameha refusing outright to intervene in the matters of his subordinate chief. Frustrated by the king's refusal, Schaefer elected to try a different approach. Without writing back to the company or St. Petersburg, the doctor boarded a ship to the island of Kauai, having resolved to meet with Kaumuali'i himself, intent on attacking the problem directly. Landing on the island, Schaefer set up a meeting with the high chief. Having hoped to discuss only the repatriation of the Bering, Schaefer was surprised to find the high chief more than willing to negotiate an unexpected deal. As the two talked, Schaefer learned that Kaumuali'i had previously ruled as the Ali'i Nui, or supreme ruler, of Kauai and Niihau. Kamehameha's recent expression of power over all of the Hawaiian Islands had reduced Kaumuali'i's status to that of a subordinate chief. Uncomfortable with the present situation, Kaumuali'i made clear not only his interest in reclaiming sovereign control over Kauai, but also his aspirations to expand his reach to include the islands of Niihau, Oahu, and Maui, all of which he'd once claimed as his own. In return for the Russian-American company's help in retaking Kauai and conquering nearly all the Hawaiian Islands, Kaumuali'i agreed to pay for the Bering's lost cargo and to act as the governor of the newly proclaimed Russian Protectorate of Hawaii. Schaefer again expressed surprise at the High Chief's eagerness to accept a deal with the Russians. Following negotiations, Kaumuali'i even agreed to pledge the islands and his crown directly to the Russian Tsar Alexander, and often appeared in public in his own Russian naval uniform. Georg Anton Schaefer arrived in Hawaii as a last-ditch diplomat tasked with the objective to retrieve a ship, and now stood on the island of Kauai beside its leader, having agreed to offer Russian military and the necessary logistical support to conquer an entire archipelago. Viewing this new agreement as a success, Schaefer finally wrote to St. Petersburg of the accomplishment and got to work building a Russian presence on the island. The cornerstone of Schaefer's operation on Kauai was Fort Elizabeth, built from locally sourced materials under Kaumuali'i's supervision in 1817. The fort, a structure standing 300 feet by 400 feet with 20-foot tall walls, boasted a Russian Orthodox church among a number of military and miscellaneous structures. As Kaumuali'i oversaw construction of Schaefer's premier foothold, the Russian-American company began building two more forts on Kauai, Fort Alexander, named after the Tsar, and Fort Barclay, named after his military marshal. These lesser forts were built by company labor rather than Hawaiian, with most workers being natives of Russian Alaska. But as his magnum opus, the to-be center of his Hawaiian operations, was being constructed on Kauai, Schaefer himself remained stationed at his factory on Oahu, an island staunchly loyal to Kamehameha. Now, if Schaefer can keep his operation and agreement with Kaumuali'i secret, it's arguable he'd be able to manage juggling his dealings with Kaumuali'i and his position on Oahu, but that's all sort of thrown out the window once you build 3 forts and have the king's rival chief strutting around in a Russian naval uniform. So as word gets out that Schaefer means to incite a Russian-assisted coup in Hawaii, the islands react. Kamehameha's loyalists are an obvious problem, but keep in mind the other forces at play. If Russia has a plan to take all the islands for themselves, the American and British operatives, who have spent years cultivating relationships with Kamehameha, are left with nothing. One man is poised to stand in the way of all British and American operations in Hawaii, and he's doing what any good military leader does, working as a factory manager behind enemy lines. Not eager to have all trade and military presence on Hawaii thrown away, a force composed of Kamehameha's loyal Hawaiians as well as American and British troops stormed Schaefer's Oahu factory and forced him from the island. Expelled from Oahu, Schaefer returned to Kauai, intent on fortifying and preparing for Russian support. But in 1817, the doctor finally received his response from the Imperial Russian government. Uninterested in defending Schaefer's limited fortifications against the combined power of Kamehameha's forces and the local American military garrison, Russia officially rejected all of the proposed terms and condemned the doctor for the entire affair. Word of the official rejection moved rapidly through the Russian-American company and the Hawaiian Islands, and in summer 1817, Schaefer fled Kauai out of fear for his life. Though a Russian presence remained on the island until 1818, and the imperial government considered revisiting the idea of colonization until 1821, Georg Anton Schaefer never returned to the Hawaiian archipelago. Abandoned by Schaefer and the Russian-American company, responsibility for Fort Elizabeth was taken over by Kaumuali'i. The chief staffed the fort at least once in 1820 to provide a 21-gun salute welcome to his son as he returned home from school in the United States. The other forts, Alexander and Barclay, were swiftly overtaken and destroyed by Hawaiian loyalists, leaving only Fort Elizabeth standing. The Hawaiian government briefly acquired the remaining fort for military use, but had it dismantled in 1864. Following his bungled affair, Schaefer returned to Russia, but his stay was remarkably short. After his firing in a brief legal battle, the doctor left for Brazil, where he presented himself as Count von Frankenthal, a title presented by no one, and attempted to inspire a German colonization effort in South America. Though he later revisited Europe, Schaefer, or the illustrious Count von Frankenthal, returned to Brazil in 1827, where he would remain until his death in 1836. Today, what remains of Fort Elizabeth is a National Historic Landmark of the United States and a Hawaiian state park. Of the 3 forts built by Georg Anton Schaefer and his attachment of the Russian-American Company, only Fort Elizabeth, known now as the Russian Fort, still stands. The fort is still accessible, and the Russian Fort Elizabeth State Historical Park offers tours of its few remaining structures. Though Schaefer's legacy still stands on the island, what was once the cornerstone of a possible Russian expansion into the South Pacific is now little more than an overgrown remnant of the fort and the empire that could have been. The Grapevine is written and produced by me, Ben Grapevine. I'd like to first give a big thanks to everyone who listened to the first episode for all the support and feedback I received. I tried to make this one a little better, and I hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something new. I hope you'll forgive me for pronunciation. I grew up in South Dakota, and believe it or not, Kaumuali'i doesn't come up often. I swear I had Kauai down until I edited the process and learned I must have given it 6 new pronunciations. If you enjoyed the podcast or have any feedback to leave, I'd love to hear it. You can find me on bengrapevine.com or on Twitter @bengrapevine. Thanks to the National Park Service for the bulk of the information necessary for this project. Their website was super helpful, and if you ever happen to be in Kauai for a day or two, consider checking out the Russian fort. It's a little overgrown and not quite ready for conquest, but it's a real piece of history. Thanks also to Casey Mitchell, whose piece in the Diplomat is one of the few available journalistic articles on the topic, and to historians Walter Borneman and Richard Pierce for information taken from Alaska, Saga of a Bold Land, and Russia's Hawaiian Adventure. Special thanks to those of you who have supported this endeavor so far. I'm happy to make content people enjoy, and I hope you found this story interesting. The Grapevine is a podcast about the world and its lesser-known stories. Stay tuned.